guys, Heidi Prieb here. Today we are talking about how to identify your attachment style. So on Monday, we looked at 10 signs that you might have an anxious attachment style. And today, we're looking at 10 signs that you might have an avoidant attachment style. Now, I think that avoidant attachment is the most misrepresented type in the media. This type is very often villainized and very often blamed for everything going wrong in relationships. And there are myriad reasons why that happens, which I do not have time to go over in this video, but I absolutely will in another video. But today I wanted to give a little bit of a perspective shift and talk about what it feels like to have an avoidant attachment style from the inside, okay? Because it's very different than a lot of people might assume. And I think that some of the confusion around the term dismissive avoidant actually comes from the name itself, because to dismiss something or to avoid it means that there must be something in your conscious awareness to either dismiss or avoid. So a lot of people think, by virtue of this name, that the dismissive avoidant type is very aware of both their own feelings and the feelings of other people, and they're choosing to either ignore those or to consciously dismiss them. And this could actually not be further from the dismissive avoidance actual experience. In reality, dismissive avoidants actually really struggle to make themselves consciously aware of their own attachment needs and of others. And this happens because their brains literally formed, neurologically became wired around not focusing on those things very early on in life, and instead focusing on practical or logical solutions to problems. So as this video goes on, we'll talk a lot more about why and where those tendencies come up for the avoidant, but I just wanted to start off by saying the term dismissive avoidant is very misleading. I wish we could drop it and just call them something a lot more neutral, because for the most part, avoidants really are acknowledging the things that are brought to their conscious attention. It's just that they're not as sensitized emotionally as, let's say, the anxiously attached type might be, which is a key reason why a lot of people with avoidant attachment styles mistake themselves for secure, because they believe every time I have a strong emotion come up, I do deal with it. I do process it. I do respond to the needs of the people in my life in a practical way. But as this video goes on, we're going to talk about where your blind spots might be and how it's those exact blind spots that at the end of the day characterize the avoidant attachment style. Okay, so let's get into it. Sign number one that you might have an avoidant attachment style is you take radical self-responsibility for your own life and your own choices, and you get very frustrated by people who continuously play the victim. So, from a very young age, avoidantly attached individuals learned that if they had a problem in life, if they had something they wanted to get done in life, they were going to have to do it themselves, because they were raised by caregivers who were either overtly or covertly hostile and rejecting when the avoidantly attached person showed need of any sort. So what they learned really young, before they had language, before they even had the conscious ability to process that this is what they were learning, is that if you have a problem, particularly if you have an emotional problem that needs to be solved, you have to find the solution to it on your own, because nobody is on their way to save you from yourself and your own feelings. So avoidantly attached people put a great amount of time, energy, and resource into making sure that they are not putting their problems on other people, that they are solving things for themselves, and that they're not in any way being a burden on others. And this isn't even something that they're consciously weighing out very often. It is how they are unconsciously wired, right? So it doesn't even necessarily occur to the avoidantly attached person to ask for help, to take their problems to other people, to ask their friends or family members what they think when they have an emotional issue. What immediately gets consciously processed by them is, what is the solution to this problem? And then they go about pursuing that solution. And because they have such a radically self-reliant attitude towards life, it can be very frustrating to avoidantly attached people when they see others playing the victim and soliciting help and attention and care in situations where the avoidant would simply solve their problems on their own. So if you have an avoidant attachment style, you might get very frustrated and feel kind of judgmental towards people who are always playing the victim, always looking for someone to blame their problems on, because you so naturally do not do that, because you learned early on that that doesn't get you what you want. Focusing on the solutions and taking action does get you what you want, so that's what you learn to rely on. Sign number two that you might have an avoidant attachment style is that intimate relationships for you are often characterized by an ongoing feeling of pressure. So, for a plethora of reasons that we will discuss thoroughly in other videos, people who have avoidant attachment styles tend to end up in romantic relationships disproportionately often with people who have anxious attachment styles. And those who have anxious attachment styles really want a high degree of emotional intimacy, of closeness. They very quickly want to plan the future and might constantly check in to make sure that their partner is on the same page. And for someone who has an avoidant attachment style, this can feel very stressful because even if you like the person you're dating, even if you're really into them, it takes you a long time to figure out whether or not a given relationship is something that you think is a worthwhile investment. Because you attend so meticulously to the logistical aspects of your own life, you have to make sure that a relationship is something that you can weave into your life in a way that fits and makes sense. And when someone is asking you to make commitments or to figure out the future before you really have a firm grasp on whether or not that person is going to be a good fit for your life, feels very stressful. Now, the problem is that as an avoidantly attached person, you don't have a high degree of emotional self-awareness. So when you feel pressure, when you feel stress, when your partner is continuously asking you to show emotions or make plans that you don't necessarily feel capable of making, what you tend to do is cave to the pressure as opposed to figuring out where you are at emotionally and communicating that clearly. And the reason that you don't do that is because you don't necessarily have the skills to do that. You might have a lot of self-awareness on a cognitive level, right? But that doesn't translate to moment-to-moment emotional self-awareness. And that type of self-awareness is what you need to navigate close relationships effectively. So often when someone is continuously asking you things like, how do you feel? What do you want? What's going on with us? Your instinct reaction is to just go, I'll tell them what they want to hear, because the pressure of not knowing what I feel and not knowing what I want and not having a solution yet is so strong that I just want to get out of this situation. And so intimate relationships for you, even if you're really fond of the other person and you're excited about where things are going with them, can often feel a little bit like you're being put in a pressure cooker. Sign number 3 that you might have an avoidant attachment style. Whether or not you're in a romantic relationship, you feel the most comfortable making major life decisions alone. So, I remember about 5 years ago coming across this article that was talking about people who feel mentally single. So what that means is whether or not you're in a relationship, you want the major decisions in your life to come from you. And to others, this might look like you're trying to be controlling, but for you, it's more that your priorities are figuring out what you want out of life and making sure you're pursuing that, and then finding a partner who shares those values and goals. So it's usually not that you're trying to control your partner and get them to do what you want. It's that for you, the circumstances of your life, what kind of career you want to pursue, where you want to live, what experiences you want to have, those are the non-negotiables for you. And the relationships that you have, particularly romantic relationships, might feel a lot more negotiable. So on your list of priorities, a romantic relationship might come below a lot of other things that you want for your life. And of course, that doesn't mean that you can't do it. Many people with avoidant attachment styles do prioritize romantic relationships and do find ways to compromise and make them work. However, this tends to be a struggle that a lot of avoidants feel at some point in their life. And they might not even realize that for other people, it feels calm to make decisions together. Like if you're anywhere on the anxious attachment spectrum, or even if you're secure, it can feel kind of nice to know that you and another person are making decisions together. So if things don't go well, then you'll figure out the solutions together. But for the avoidantly attached person who relies predominantly on themselves to figure things out and who trusts their own judgment well and above anyone else's judgment, it can feel really stressful to make big compromises based on what someone else wants. Sign number 4 that you might have an avoidant attachment style. You're a lot more comfortable meeting the practical needs of your loved ones than the emotional ones. So it's not that people with avoidant attachment styles don't care about the people in their lives. It's not that they don't want to show up in a completely loving and attentive way. It's that the emotional issues are a lot more difficult to navigate for you as a dismissive avoidant type because your own emotions are pretty repressed for you a lot of the time. So you don't always feel super competent in the realm of emotions, and so you tend to show your love through acts of service, through showing up for people in practical ways, through being attentive to what your loved ones need on a logistical level, and trying to be proactive about helping them meet those needs. So when someone is sick or needs a little bit of help in some practical area that you can provide help in, that is your time to shine, right? You really know how to give people practical support. But when someone is crying in front of you or when someone needs to process something emotionally, you might be inclined to go immediately to problem-solving mode because that's the area that you excel in. And that might make some of your loved ones feel like you're dismissing their feelings. It's not that you're intentionally being uncaring, it's that you're trying to show up in the way that you feel competent and that you know how to show up. So that really is your way of showing care, at least if you have not already begun doing work on your attachment style. If so, you might be getting better at tending to emotional concerns. Sign number 5 that you might have an avoidant attachment style. You are comfortable relying on other people to meet your wants, but you want to be the only one responsible for meeting your needs. So what I mean by that is, you know, for example, that you have interpersonal needs. So you know that you need friendships or else you get bored. You might even know that you need an intimate romantic relationship or else you don't feel fulfilled sexually or emotionally. But you kind of consider those things wants. Like those are not necessarily the most important parts of your life. You would be sad if you lost your friends or your partner, but your life would not fall apart. Now, when it comes to meeting things like your practical, financial, survival needs, you want to be in charge of meeting those things for yourself because you would feel a persistent and chronic sense of anxiety if you knew that your survival needs were dependent upon another person. And the reason you would feel that anxiety is because you have what we call a positive view of self, negative view of others. From a young age, you learned that the only person you could rely on is yourself, that other people are not necessarily going to be available to you when you need them. So you learned that if you want to feel rock solid, like your feet are planted on solid ground, and like the rug is definitely not going to get pulled out from under your feet, you have to be in charge of meeting your base survival needs. And then other people are only what you go to for your wants. So the thought of, let's say, someone who is avoidantly attached, giving up their livelihood and depending on their spouse for income will probably be a lot more stressful than it would for an anxious or secure type, right? They want to make sure that their needs are being met by them. Sign number 6 that you might have an avoidant attachment style. When your feelings are hurt, you tend to retreat to process rather than reach out to repair. So it probably doesn't even occur to you as someone with an avoidant attachment style that when someone hurts your feelings, you could go to that person, talk to them about it, and have your emotional state be repaired by co-regulating with someone. Your instinct is naturally to withdraw, observe your own emotional experience, try to figure out how you can get yourself to feel differently, and then only once you've gone through a repair process in your own mind, return to the relationship. So you may never address a lot of the really key ways that people have hurt you because it doesn't occur to you that someone else could help you feel better, right? Early on in life, you learned self-soothing tendencies, which means that instead of going to your parent or your caregiver to help make you feel better, you learned how to process your internal state and change it on your own. So we'll talk more about this in a minute, but a lot of the time when romantic partners tell you, like, be vulnerable, open up to me, bring things to me. In theory, you're like, yeah, of course I'll do that if that comes up. But as soon as a hurt happens, you have such a strong, overwhelming instinct to withdraw and process it on your own that you might not even realize that's what you're doing. In the moment, it might just feel like overwhelm. And it also might feel like you're being compassionate to the other person by taking care of your emotional experiences first, then talking about it after. And there is an element of truth to that, right? The other end of this spectrum is reactivity and blame, but there's also a happy medium where you can work through things interpersonally, allow the other person to contribute their perspectives, you contribute your emotions and perspectives, and meet somewhere healthily in the middle. That's the secure approach to relational repair. But the avoidant approach is to instantly withdraw, process, come to your own conclusions, and then decide on your own whether or not you're going to be able to continue the relationship. Sign number 7 that you might have an avoidant attachment style is that you're open to romantic relationships, but you struggle to meet someone who you feel meets your standards for self-sufficiency and independence. And if you do meet such a person, you don't really understand how to get close to them. So a lot of people think that avoidants are trying to avoid romantic relationships left, right, and center. But the felt experience of most avoidants is that they actually would like to be in a romantic partnership and they would like to have a partner who they share their life with. It's just that they have their own priorities so clear and they are so independent that they really struggle to meet someone who they A, feel like would fit into their life in a meaningful way without them having to compromise their major priorities, or B, who is independent and self-sufficient enough for the avoidantly attached person to respect and feel attracted to them. Now, every once in a while, you probably will meet someone like this as an avoidantly attached person. However, because your bar for self-regulation is so high because you do so much of it unconsciously, it's likely that when you meet someone who you see as regulated enough to meet your standards, they're also avoidantly attached. And it's very difficult for you to figure out how to get emotionally close to someone who doesn't open up easily because, again, you don't have a strong emotional self-awareness. So it can be difficult for you to kind of find the glue to keep a relationship together with another avoidant, despite the fact that you might really respect and admire them. So as a consequence, you might end up continuously in relationships with people who veer more towards the anxious side of the attachment spectrum because they're more likely to pursue you, which means you don't have to do that intense emotional legwork, right? But I think that this point is a really important one because a lot of people struggle to identify as dismissive avoidant because DAs are characterized by this desire to avoid romantic relationships at all costs. But in reality, avoidant types often want someone to share their life with, they just can't find the right person. Or if they do, they can't figure out how to make a relationship work with that person. And in future videos, we'll talk a lot more about how to develop those skills. But for now, what you need to know is that that mindset of the DA is not one of I'm avoiding intimacy left, right, and center. It's more likely to feel like I want a relationship, but it just hasn't happened for me yet for whatever reason. Sign number 8 that you might have a dismissive avoidant attachment style. You feel very protective over your time and your physical space. Now, whether you know this or not, it's probably not in your conscious awareness, but all of the routines that you have for yourself, all of the care that you put into the physical space that you live in, that is all a product of you trying to emotionally self-regulate yourself. So every time I see someone on YouTube or whatever who has a routine where they wake up at 5 a.m. every morning, they do 20 minutes of meditation, 20 minutes of journaling, 20 minutes of exercise, and they have this whole robust routine, I look at that as a person who is desperately trying to self-regulate the only way they know how, which is by making their world and their environment very predictable for themselves. And if you have an avoidant attachment style, you probably do feel the most comfortable in a very predictable environment that is under your own control. So it can feel very stressful for you to share a living space, whether that's with a roommate, a family member, or a romantic partner. It can feel very stressful for you to not have control over your own schedule, because how do you know that you're going to be able to meet your needs if you don't have control over how your time is being spent in a day? So you'll often see when people have an avoidant attachment style, a tendency towards being very protective over the space that they live in and also the way that they spend their time. They might not be super go with the flow when it comes to making plans. They might feel really attached to their routines, and they might be very reluctant to share physical space. Or if they do share a living space, they might really need a part of that space that is dedicated to them where they can go and self-regulate and know that they'll be alone. And again, it's not conscious, but what that is self-regulation. Sign number 9 that you might have an avoidant attachment style. You don't really know what people are talking about when they talk about being vulnerable and opening up. Because again, people kind of look at avoidant attachment like it is 3 anxiously attached people in a trench coat. But no, avoidant attachment is when you are desensitized to your emotional experiences internally, right? So it's not like you have all of these deep fears and vulnerabilities and secrets that you've been keeping and that you've just been waiting to put on the right person once they show up and show you that they're trustworthy. You don't know a lot of the time what your deep emotional inner experience is until you start doing conscious work. So when people tell you you can trust me, you can be vulnerable with me, you can rely on me, you're kind of like, okay, well, thank you, but I don't need that. I'm good, I feel fine pretty much all of the time. And when I don't feel fine, I just deal with it. And that attitude is very indicative that you might have an avoidant attachment style. Sign number 10 that you might have an avoidant attachment style, and this is a huge one, is that you consider caring for someone to be equivalent with not putting your needs on them and not burdening them in any way. So a lot of the time, again, people think avoidantly attached people are cruel and callous and they don't care about other people, but what they don't see behind the scenes is that avoidantly attached people are constantly keeping themselves okay, not needing anything from other people, because they believe that that is what love is. Love is when you tend to your own problems so that you don't create any sort of burden for anyone else. And that's why a lot of the time it can feel unloving to avoidant types. If, let's say, they have an anxious partner who is chronically putting themselves in emotionally messy situations and then asking the dismissive avoidant to help them navigate those situations. Because the DA looks at that and says, well, self-regulation, taking care of yourself, and showing up for other people without putting your needs on them is what love is. Why are they not showing care by solving their own problems? And so there can be this fundamental misunderstanding between anxious and avoidant types in particular, where both people think that they are acting in such a loving and caring way towards the other, and the other is not reciprocating. Because again, anxiously attached individuals see co-regulation and sharing in problems and finding solutions together as love, and avoidants see finding your own solutions to problems and not putting any burden on your partner as love. So that is, in my opinion, probably the single biggest misconception that happens between these two types, and you see it happening all of the time. So that's something that we're going to go into in much more detail in future videos. But for now, I just wanted to go over that kind of mindset of me solving my own problems and trying my best to not disturb anyone else in any way is what love is and is how I show love to others. That's very indicative of the avoidant attachment style. So I look forward to having you on this journey. And until next time, I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves, and I'll see you back here again soon.